But they were creating these hybrid creatures, man. They were messing with the genetic pool of the animal kingdom, mixing with their divine DNA with animal DNA, mixing one animal with another's animal. All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another video. I'm the Tattooed Preacher. In this video, I want to talk about a recent article put out by Time Magazine. In fact, it's the cover. Time Magazine, where it's reported that they have, how do they say it? De-extincting. They've de-extinct a dire wolf. They've de-extincted. The dire wolf was last known to exist over 10,000 years ago. And now, according to the article, it says relying on deft genetic engineering and ancient preserved DNA, colossal scientists deciphered the dire wolf genome. Right? We know this. They've been messing around with genetics, DNA, the genome, doing crazy stuff behind the scenes for decades. All right? I mean, and I'd venture to say that this has already happened, because typically when something gets released like this, a certain kind of technology or a certain kind of scientific, I don't know, quote unquote breakthrough, it's like decades. It's decades old technology. So think about where they're actually at right now behind the scenes. Anyways, they rewrote the genetic code of the common gray wolf to match it. And using domestic dogs as surrogate mothers, brought Romulus, Remus, and their sister, 2-month-old Khaleesi, into the world during 3 separate births last fall and this winter, effectively, for the first time, de-extincting a line of beasts whose live gene pool long ago vanished. All right, this animal went extinct over 10,000 years ago, and now science has been messing around with the genetics, using other animals as surrogate mothers, did some genetic splicing, got some ancient preserved DNA, and have figured out how to now reintroduce the dire wolf back into life. Now, every breakthrough comes with certain risks, right? Like, just from a practical surface level warning. What is this going to do to the current ecosystem? You introduce these suckers back into the wild that have been gone for 10,000 plus years. What's that going to do to how the earth has just naturally evolved, if you will, over the last 10,000 years? Animal kingdom, the whole system. You introduce these suckers back in there. What's going to happen to that? And then what about cloning issues, health issues? Because you're splicing stuff. Like this isn't not like a natural birth. They're doing stuff to the DNA. They figured out the genetic code, if you will, of these suckers. It's made in a lab. So what's like the health situation of these suckers? Like, how do we know? How do they know that when these things are full grown, that they're just going to naturally behave like they did 10,000 plus years ago when we weren't even around? And then you have, this is where I want to bring the biblical paradigm into this situation. And again, I've talked about this so many episodes, but it's becoming more and more prevalent. Genesis 6, right? The fallen angels came down, mated with human women, creating Nephilim. But they didn't just mate with human women. These fallen sons of God, these fallen divine beings, were messing with the human genome, but they were also messing with the animal kingdom. And we see in the book of Enoch, in the book of Jasher, these extra biblical texts, when that goes into a bit more detail than we see in Genesis 6, that they were creating these hybrid creatures, man. They were messing with the genetic pool of the animal kingdom, mixing with their divine DNA, with animal DNA, mixing one animal with another's animal. They were doing this genetic splicing back then, creating these cryptid creatures. This is where all the mythology of the centaur, the minotaur, the satyrs came in, and a whole bunch of ancient creatures that were created in the pre-flood world. This is why, again, God sent the flood. It wasn't just that people were sinning really bad. It's that the entire gene pool of animal and human were becoming corrupted. And if God didn't step in and stop it, then humanity as we know it would have ceased to exist. And now we're living in a day where I think just a few months ago, scientists from Japan came out, figured out how to clone stuff. And you just hear these reports, you go down this rabbit hole. This stuff has been going on for decades, messing with the gene pool, splicing DNA, mixing stuff together. Like this is the stuff that literally only belongs to God. When you start playing with DNA, you start playing with this kind of stuff, you are crossing as when we see in Genesis 6 that the fallen angels, it says they left their first estate. They violated the created order. God created them to live and inhabit a certain realm. They violated their realm, came into ours, and started mixing their seed with our seed. What the scientists are doing and have been doing for now decades is they're violating the created order. They're crossing the bounds of what humans should be, of what humans are allowed to do. They're crossing that bounds into the space that's only for God. God's the author of life and creation. God created things perfect. He created things the way they should be. He didn't give us the right to take his creation and start messing with the DNA and the genetics to create these other things that he never created. This is why the flood happened. A whole bunch of creatures and stuff was getting created that were abominations to him. He never intended for them to be created. And now, again, this is just the dire wolf. But where does it stop here? You introduce this, then what? There's all this talk about reintroducing the woolly mammoths. As this knowledge increases and technology increases, where do you draw the line here? Now we're starting to play God. And this is where God ultimately steps in and says, no more. This is why the flood came. This is why I think we are in the end. We're in the end times. Because if you look where technology is going, you look at what's happening, we are violating the created order. And it's only going to increase and become more and more evil, more and more intense. And so God's going to be like, this is it. Clock stops. That's coming. But it's until that happens, where do we draw the line here? We start playing with God. We start playing with DNA and genetics and the genetic code, and you start mixing with stuff. This is not we can't do that. We're not God. But where does it stop here? So this is where it gets scary. And so if God doesn't intervene, and he's going to, but if he doesn't intervene, this is what happened in the pre-flood world. The entire human genome became corrupt. minus Noah, his wife, his sons, and his sons' wives. That's why they were preserved. Their DNA was uncorrupted. Everyone else's became corrupt. Animal kingdom, human kingdom, corrupt. And if we leave this kind of stuff unchecked, this is what's going to happen to us here. So, dangerous. Dangerous. But let me know what y'all think of this. Let me know where this goes from here. Share your thoughts down below. Let's start a conversation. And we'll see you all in the next video. Much love and God bless.